What would you do if you had just $75,000 to your name, everything you'd managed to save from your divorce settlement and the sale of nearly everything you owned? Would you spend it all on a condemned Victorian mansion that the entire town believed was haunted? That's exactly what one desperate mother did. But what she discovered hidden away in the sealed attic wasn't just cobwebs and old furniture. It was a collection of artifacts so historically significant and valuable that it would not only change her life forever, but make her the target of dangerous people willing to do anything to possess it. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global family of viewers. Rebecca Mitchell was 42 years old, a former museum curator whose life had been dismantled piece by piece over the past 18 months. The prestigious university museum where she'd worked for 11 years had lost its funding during budget cuts, eliminating her position and the career she'd built her identity around. Then her husband of 15 years blindsided her with divorce papers and the revelation of a years-long affair with his 26-year-old assistant. The bitter divorce proceedings had drained what little savings Rebecca had left after months of unemployment. Her ex-husband, a successful corporate attorney, had somehow managed to secure their family home in the settlement, leaving Rebecca and her 14-year-old daughter Lily temporarily living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that consumed nearly all of Rebecca's unemployment benefits. It was like my entire identity had been erased, Rebecca would later tell reporters. In less than 2 years, I lost my career, my marriage, my home, and my sense of security. The only thing I refused to lose was my dignity and my determination to give Lily stability. Lily wasn't just any teenager. Highly gifted with an IQ of 145, she was also on the autism spectrum, with sensory processing issues that made the noisy apartment complex a daily nightmare for her. The unpredictability of their new circumstances had triggered increasing anxiety, attacks affecting her previously stellar academic performance. Watching Lily struggle was the hardest part, Rebecca explained, her voice catching with emotion. She would cover her ears when the neighbors argued through the thin walls at night, rocking back and forth. She needed routine, predictability, and quiet, none of which I could provide in that apartment. Rebecca had been searching for months for an affordable rental home in a quieter neighborhood, but in the overheated housing market of Glenwood Springs, Colorado, prices had skyrocketed beyond her reach. Even modest homes were being snapped up by wealthy vacationers or converted to short-term rentals, leaving few options for local families, especially those with limited income. Then came the final blow that would force Rebecca to make the most desperate decision of her life. Her apartment complex was being converted to luxury condominiums, and all month-to-month tenants were given 60 days to vacate. In a rental market with no vacancies and prices well beyond her budget, Rebecca faced the terrifying prospect of homelessness with a special needs teenager. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Lily with my crying. Rebecca recalled, I had $75,000 from selling our second car, my grandmother's antique silver, and almost everything else of value I owned. It was supposed to be our safety net until I found stable employment again. But now it looked like it would barely cover 6 months of inflated rent somewhere, if I could even find a place. That's when Rebecca remembered something her grandmother used to tell her. Sometimes the thing everyone else is afraid of is exactly what you need to embrace. Little did she know how prophetic those words would prove to be. Rebecca Mitchell's resume had once opened doors throughout the museum world. With a master's degree in art history and specialized training in artifact authentication, she had been the youngest senior curator in her university museum's history. Her exhibits had drawn national attention and grant funding. But now, 18 months of sending applications into the void had yielded nothing but automated rejection emails. The arts and cultural sector was hit hard by funding cuts, Rebecca explained. Museums were laying off staff, not hiring, and at 42, I was competing with recent graduates willing to work for entry-level salaries. Her unemployment benefits were set to expire in less than a month, adding to the pressure of their housing crisis. Lily's situation was deteriorating alongside her mother's. Once a straight-A student who found comfort and structure in her academic routine, she had begun experiencing anxiety-induced migraines that kept her home from school several days each month. Her sensory processing issues made the apartment's thin walls a constant source of distress. She would wear noise-cancelling headphones almost constantly, Rebecca said. She had dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Her teachers were concerned about the sudden change in her demeanor and performance. Rebecca had already sold her collection of first-edition art history books, her grandmother's silver, and most of her jewelry. She'd even parted with the pearl necklace her parents had given her for her college graduation and the diamond earrings from her wedding day, symbols of happier times sacrificed to keep a roof over their heads. I kept a mental list of what could go next if needed, she admitted. The laptop could be replaced with a cheaper model. My professional clothes could be sold since I wasn't going to interviews anymore. I was calculating the value of everything we owned, always thinking about what else could be converted to cash. The one thing Rebecca refused to sacrifice was Lily's collection of specialized sensory tools and her education fund, a modest account Rebecca had started when Lily was born, and that her ex-husband had surprisingly not contested in the divorce. That money wasn't for our present crisis, Rebecca insisted. It was Lily's future, and I wasn't going to touch it, no matter how desperate things got. During this time, Rebecca maintained a facade of normalcy for Lily's sake. She prepared nutritious meals on a tight budget, helped with homework, and never let her daughter see her crying in the bathroom at night. But the strain was showing in the fine lines that had appeared around her eyes, and the weight she'd lost from skipping meals to make the food budget stretch further. Lily is perceptive, as many kids on the spectrum are, Rebecca explained. She would ask why I wasn't eating dinner sometimes, and I'd make excuses about having a late lunch, but I think she knew. One day, she offered me half her sandwich and said, "You need protein for brain function, Mom." That nearly broke me. Rebecca had applied for subsidized housing, but the waiting lists stretched for years. She'd reached out to distant relatives, only to find they had their own financial struggles. Even her parents, retired teachers living on fixed incomes in a senior community in Arizona, could offer only a few $100s to help. Money Rebecca initially refused, but eventually accepted when the electric bill came due. Her ex-husband, Bradford Mitchell, provided the bare minimum in child support mandated by the court and had made it clear he had no intention of helping beyond that legal obligation. He told me I should have thought about financial security before causing the divorce, Rebecca said, the irony evident in her voice. As if his affair was somehow my fault. Bradford had quickly remarried his young assistant and moved her into what had once been Rebecca and Lily's family home. The emotional wound of seeing another woman living in the space where she had raised her daughter was almost as painful as their financial situation. It had to drop Lily off there for her visitation weekends, Rebecca recalled. Standing on the porch of what used to be my home, seeing furniture I had chosen now arranged by someone else, it was surreal, like watching a stranger living your life while you've been erased. As the days ticked down toward their eviction date, Rebecca grew increasingly desperate. She made daily calls to every rental agency in a 50-mile radius. She scoured online listings at all hours. She even considered moving to another state where housing might be more affordable, but that would mean uprooting Lily from her school and specialized support system, something she was determined to avoid if at all possible. Lily needs stability and routine more than most teenagers, Rebecca explained. A complete change of environment could set her back years in terms of the coping mechanisms she's developed. Her current school has an excellent program for gifted students with learning differences. Finding something comparable elsewhere would be nearly impossible, especially without the resources to research options properly. It was during this darkest period that Rebecca found herself scrolling through real estate listings late one night, looking at properties she knew were well beyond her means, a form of self-torture she had developed in her insomnia. That's when she saw it. A listing that would change everything. The listing appeared under a section labeled Distressed Properties, Cash Sales Only. Rebecca had clicked on it by accident, having dozed off momentarily with her finger on the trackpad. The page that loaded showed a once magnificent Victorian mansion that now looked like something from a horror movie. Blackwood Manor, as it was called, had clearly seen better days. The elaborate gingerbread trim was rotting in places. Several windows were boarded up, and the once majestic wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side. But something about the grand old house called to Rebecca's curator's eye. Beneath the decay, she could see the elegant bones of what had once been the crown jewel of Glenwood Springs architecture. Built in 1887 by railroad tycoon Thaddeus Blackwood, the mansion had once been the social center of the region, hosting presidents and celebrities of its era. Starting bid, $65,000. Condemned property, sold as is. Significant structural issues, no utilities connected. City code violations must be addressed within 6 months of purchase, or property will revert to city ownership. Rebecca stared at the screen, the gears in her mind turning. The price was within her reach, barely, but the condemned status and mention of code violations suggested the true cost would be much higher than the purchase price. Still, her professional background had trained her to see value where others saw only decay. I found myself calculating what it would take to make just enough of it habitable for us, Rebecca recalled. Not the whole mansion, that would be impossible, but maybe a few rooms, enough to get by until I could find work again. The next morning, instead of sending out more job applications, Rebecca called the listing agent. She learned that Blackwood Manor had been abandoned for nearly a decade after the last owner died without heirs. The city had seized it for unpaid taxes, and after years of trying to attract developers to restore it, they were now simply trying to offload the liability. The auction was scheduled for the following week. The agent practically laughed when I expressed interest, Rebecca said. He told me, lady, that place would take $1 million to restore. It's a tear down that the Historical Society won't let anyone tear down. When I asked about just making part of it habitable, he said, the city inspector won't even go inside anymore, says the floors could collapse at any moment. Any rational person would have taken this as a clear warning. But Rebecca was no longer operating from a place of rationality. She was operating from desperation. That evening, Lily found her mother surrounded by printouts of the mansion listing. What's that place? She asked, studying the images with the intense focus characteristic of her autism. Just an old house. I was looking at, Rebecca replied, trying to sound casual. Lily stared at the photos for several long moments. It looks sad, she finally said, like it's waiting for someone to care about it again. The comment hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly how she felt about her own life? Waiting for someone to care, to see the value still present beneath the surface damage? The next day brought another rejection letter from a potential employer and a notice that their apartment complex had already rented their unit to new tenants, starting the day after their 60-day notice expired. There would be no extension, no grace period. Rebecca called every shelter in the area, only to discover that most had waiting lists and none had private rooms where Lily could have the quiet environment she needed. The few extended stay motels, in their price range were in areas known for drug activity and crime. That night, Rebecca made a decision that would change their lives forever. She would attend the auction for Blackwood Manor. She would bid every penny she had if necessary. It was a desperate gamble, but facing homelessness with a special needs child had pushed her to the edge of what she could bear. "I didn't tell Lily," Rebecca said. "I didn't tell anyone. I knew they would try to talk me out of it, and maybe they would have been right to do so, but I was out of options and out of time." The morning of the auction, Rebecca dressed in her one remaining professional outfit, a navy blue suit she'd kept for interviews. She transferred her entire savings, $75,213.47, to her checking account. She kissed a still sleeping Lily on the forehead and left their neighbor's teenage daughter in charge, saying she had an important appointment. "I felt like I was walking to my own execution," Rebecca remembered. "My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking, this is insane. You're about to spend everything you have on a condemned building." But then I'd think about the alternative, Lily in a shelter, or worse, and I kept driving. The county courthouse of Glenwood Springs was an imposing limestone structure built during the same Gilded Age that had produced Blackwood Manor. Rebecca climbed the worn marble steps, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain others could hear it. The auction was being held in a wood-paneled room on the second floor, where rows of chairs faced a small podium. Rebecca had expected a crowd of developers and house flippers eager to snatch up properties. Instead, she found only a handful of people scattered throughout the room. Most looked like professional property investors, dressed in casual business attire and studying tablets or smartphones with bored expressions. No one seemed interested in Blackwood Manor, Rebecca recalled. "I overheard one man tell another, 'That Victorian money pit is on the list again. How many times are they going to try to unload that white elephant?'" Rebecca took a seat in the back row, clutching her purse with white-knuckled fingers. Inside was her checkbook and bank card, representing every penny she had left in the world. She had done minimal research on auction procedures the night before, enough to know she would need to register as a bidder and would be expected to put down a percentage of the purchase price immediately if she won. The auctioneer, a grey-haired man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, began promptly at 10 a.m. The first several properties, a foreclosed ranch-style home, a vacant lot, and a former gas station, sold quickly, with multiple bidders driving prices well above the starting bids. "With each property that sold, my anxiety increased," Rebecca said. "The prices were climbing so high, so fast. I began to worry that even the starting bid for Blackwood Manor might be more than I had." Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the auctioneer announced, "Next item, property ID number 87 Wellum 42, commonly known as Blackwood Manor, located at 1887 Highland Avenue. Victorian structure on 3.8 acres. Property has been vacant approximately 9 years. Has been designated as condemned by city inspectors. Multiple code violations. No utilities currently connected and is sold strictly as is. Starting bid is $65,000. A murmur ran through the small crowd. One man in the front row actually laughed out loud. "Do I have $65,000? The auctioneer asked, scanning the room with practiced eyes. Rebecca's hand trembled as she raised it slightly. She could feel her pulse in her throat. $65,000 from the lady in the back, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I have $70,000? There was a long, uncomfortable silence. No other hands went up. $65,000 going once, the auctioneer continued, sounding surprised at the lack of competition. Just as he was about to say, going twice, a man in the corner casually lifted his hand. $70,000 from Mr. Donnelly, the auctioneer confirmed. "Do I have $75,000? Rebecca raised her hand again, committing the last of her funds. $75,000 from the lady in the back. Do I have $80,000? Mr. Donnelly glanced over his shoulder at Rebecca, seeming to notice her for the first time. He studied her for a moment, taking in her slightly outdated suit and the desperate look in her eyes. Then he shook his head and returned his attention to his phone. No, $75,000 going once, going twice. The auctioneer paused as if expecting a last-second bid. Sold to the lady in the back for $75,000. Rebecca sat frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. She had done it. She had purchased Blackwood Manor. She had also just spent every penny she had in the world on a condemned building that the city inspector reportedly refused to enter. As the room cleared for a brief recess, Mr. Donnelly approached her. He was in his 50s, expensively dressed in casual attire that nevertheless screamed wealth. "You do realize what you just bought, don't you?" he asked, his tone somewhere between concerned and condescending. "A home for my daughter and me," Rebecca replied, lifting her chin slightly. Donnelly shook his head. "Lady, I develop historical properties for a living. That place would take at least $1 million to make habitable again, probably 2 or 3, to restore properly. I was only bidding to acquire the land. The structure itself is a tear-down." "Then why did you stop bidding?" Rebecca asked. He seemed taken aback by the direct question. "Because I recognized that look in your eyes. You weren't going to stop, were you? You would have gone higher if you could." Rebecca didn't confirm or deny this. "Well, good luck," Donnelly said, handing her a business card. "When reality sets in and you're ready to sell that property, give me a call. I'll take it off your hands for what you paid, even after you discover what a mistake you've made." The clerk's office, Rebecca signed the paperwork with trembling hands and wrote a check for $75,000, everything she had. In return, she received a folder of documents, a property deed, and a single large iron key that looked like something from another century. "That's the Blackwood place, isn't it?" the clerk asked, an older woman with kind eyes. "Yes," Rebecca admitted, bracing herself for more warnings about what a terrible mistake she'd made. Instead, the clerk leaned forward and whispered, "My grandmother worked there as a housekeeper back when old Thaddeus was still alive. She always said there were secrets in that house, rooms no one was allowed to enter, visitors who came at night and left before dawn." She straightened up. "Not many people would take on Blackwood Manor. Takes courage or desperation." "Maybe a bit of both," Rebecca replied. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca sat in her car for a long moment, key in hand, trying to process what she had just done. She had sold everything she owned and spent every penny she had on a condemned mansion that professionals considered unsalvageable. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Or was this the first step toward rebuilding their future? She called the neighbor watching Lily to say she would be home late. Then she pointed her car toward Highland Avenue, determined to see her new purchase up close before breaking the news to her daughter. Highland Avenue had once been the most prestigious address in Glenwood Springs, situated on a gentle rise overlooking the town and the river beyond. It had been home to the mining and railroad elite who had built their fortunes in Colorado's boom years. Now, most of the grand old homes had been meticulously restored as bed and breakfasts or divided into upscale apartments, all except one. At the very end of Highland Avenue, partially hidden behind overgrown pine trees and a rusted wrought iron fence, stood Blackwood Manor. Rebecca's heart sank as she pulled up to the property. If anything, it looked worse in person than it had in the photographs. The 3-story Victorian loomed against the afternoon sky, its once white paint now a peeling greyish hue. Elaborate gingerbread trim hung precariously from the eaves. Several windows on the upper floors were broken or boarded over. The wraparound porch sagged noticeably on the east side, its ornate railings rotted through in places. A turret on the western corner listed slightly, as though the house itself were leaning away from the wind. No trespassing. Condemned structure. Unsafe for entry, read a large sign affixed to the front gate. Rebecca sat in her car, staring at what was now her property, her home, if she could somehow make it habitable. The enormity of what she had done crashed over her in waves. I actually started to laugh, she later recalled. A weird, slightly hysterical laugh. I had just spent everything I had on this disaster. What was I thinking? What would I tell Lily? Where would we even sleep tonight? As she sat there, a police cruiser pulled up behind her car. An officer approached, looking concerned. "Ma'am, this property is condemned. No one's allowed on the premises," he said, hand resting casually near his belt. Rebecca fumbled in her purse and produced the property deed. I just bought it at the county auction. Today." The officer studied the paperwork, eyebrows rising. "You bought Blackwood Manor? On purpose?" "It seems so," Rebecca replied, attempting a smile. The officer, whose nameplate read Ramirez, shook his head slightly. "Ma'am, Miss Mitchell, is it? I don't mean to overstep, but are you aware of the condition of this property? It's been condemned for safety reasons." "I know it needs work," Rebecca acknowledged, the understatement hanging in the air between them. "Needs work is putting it mildly," Officer Ramirez said. "The last time our department was called out here, about 3 years ago when some teenagers broke in, my partner stepped through a floorboard and nearly fell through to the level below. The city inspector won't even enter to do assessments anymore. It's that unstable." "I understand," Rebecca said, though the reality of what she had purchased was becoming increasingly terrifyingly clear. "But it's mine now, and I need to at least see what I'm dealing with." Officer Ramirez studied her for a moment, then sighed. "I can't let you go in there alone. It's not safe, and I'd be liable if something happened. Tell you what, let me call this in, and I'll escort you through the ground floor only. Just a quick look. The upper levels are absolutely off-limits without structural engineers signing off." Relieved to have an ally, however reluctant, Rebecca agreed. She followed the officer to the front gate, which was secured with a rusted chain. Her new key, large and ornate, fit the ancient padlock surprisingly well. "How long has this place been empty?" she asked as they made their way up the weed-choked path to the front steps. The last owner, Margaret Blackwood, died about 9 years ago, Officer Ramirez explained. "She was the last of the family line, a recluse in her later years. After she died, the estate got tied up in legal issues for a while. By the time the city took possession for back taxes, the deterioration was already significant. There were a couple of developers who showed interest over the years, but the cost of restoration versus the Historical Society's restrictions made it economically unfeasible. They reached the massive front porch, stepping carefully to avoid rotted boards. The front door was solid oak, with elaborate carvings and a stained glass transom above it. Despite years of neglect, the craftsmanship was still evident. Rebecca inserted the key into the door with trembling hands. It turned with surprising ease, as if it had been recently oiled. The door swung open with an ominous creak that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The smell hit them immediately, musty, damp, with undertones of rot and animal droppings. Rebecca covered her nose and mouth with her hand as Officer Ramirez switched on his heavy-duty flashlight. "Power's been off for years," he reminded her. "Watch your step." They entered what must have once been a grand foyer, a sweeping staircase. Curved up to the second floor, its carved banister intact, but coated in dust and cobwebs. High ceilings, now water-stained, featured intricate plasterwork. Doorways led off to various rooms, and filthy windows allowed just enough grey light to see the outlines of covered furniture. "The main floor seems more stable than I expected," Officer Ramirez noted, testing the floorboards cautiously as they moved forward. "Still, I wouldn't have more than 2 or 3 people in any one spot." They moved carefully from room to room, a formal parlor with a marble fireplace, a dining room large enough for 20 guests, a library with built-in shelves now sagging and empty, and a kitchen with ancient appliances from perhaps the 1950s, the most modern part of the house. Throughout it all, Rebecca's trained eye noted details that others might miss. Despite the decay, the house retained extraordinary architectural elements: hand-carved moldings, inlaid wood floors beneath the grime, fixtures of brass and crystal, and stained glass windows that, if restored, would be museum quality. "This place was absolutely magnificent in its day," she murmured, more to herself than to the officer. "Still would be, with about $3 million and a construction crew of 50, Officer Ramirez replied pragmatically. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, what exactly are you planning to do with this property?" Rebecca hesitated, reluctant to admit the truth, that she had no plan beyond finding shelter for herself and Lily before they were evicted. Before she could answer, a noise from upstairs made them both freeze, a distinct thump, as if someone had dropped something heavy. "This place is supposed to be empty," Officer Ramirez said quietly, hand moving to his weapon. "Stay here." "It's probably just an animal," Rebecca suggested, though the hair on the back of her neck was standing up. "Raccoons or squirrels?" "Let's hope so," the officer replied, calling in his location on his radio before cautiously approaching the grand staircase. Just as he placed his foot on the first step, they heard another sound, like something being dragged across the floor above them. "Hello?" Officer Ramirez called out firmly. "This is the police. Is someone up there?" Silence answered him. "I'm coming up," he announced, drawing his weapon. "Sir or ma'am, I need you to identify yourself immediately." "Be careful," Rebecca whispered, suddenly regretting the impulse that had brought them here. "The staircase might not be stable." Officer Ramirez tested each step cautiously before putting his full weight on it. Remarkably, the staircase seemed solid, despite its neglected appearance. He had made it halfway up when a loud crack echoed through the foyer. Rebecca screamed as a section of the ceiling directly above her gave way, sending a cascade of plaster, wood, and dust crashing down. She leapt backward, narrowly avoiding being hit by debris. "Ms. Mitchell, are you okay?" Officer Ramirez called down, hurrying back down the stairs. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was racing. Just startled, they both stared at the hole in the ceiling, through which they could now see part of the floor above. Something caught Rebecca's eye, a glint of metal among the debris. Before Officer Ramirez could stop her, she had picked up a tarnished silver picture frame that had fallen with the ceiling material. The photograph inside, protected by the glass, showed a stern-looking man with a magnificent handlebar moustache, dressed in late 19th century formal attire, standing beside a seated woman in an elaborate Victorian gown. Behind them stood a line of uniformed staff, clearly Blackwood Manor in its heyday. "That must be Thaddeus Blackwood himself," Officer Ramirez noted, peering over her shoulder. "The original owner." "What an extraordinary face," Rebecca murmured, studying the harsh lines and penetrating eyes of the man in the photograph. "He looks like someone with secrets." "According to local legend, he had plenty," Officer Ramirez replied. "Blackwood made his fortune in railroads officially, but there were always rumors about where his initial capital came from. Some said he discovered a gold mine and kept it secret. Others suggested less savory sources." A sudden gust of wind, through a broken window, made the entire structure creak alarmingly around them. "We should go," Officer Ramirez said firmly. "That ceiling collapse confirms this building isn't safe for entry. I'm going to have to report this to the city inspector." "Just one more minute," Rebecca pleaded, her curator's instincts fully engaged now. "If there are historical artifacts falling through the ceiling, I need to know what else might be at risk." The officer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "One more minute, But we're not going upstairs, and we're not going any deeper into the house. Rebecca nodded gratefully and quickly examined the room they were in with more attention to detail. Despite the grime and decay, she could see evidence of Blackwood Manor's former glory. Silk wallpaper, though water-stained and peeling, elaborate crown moulding, and what appeared to be genuine Tiffany glass in some of the light fixtures. "This place is a time capsule," she breathed, her professional assessment temporarily overriding her personal anxiety. "With proper restoration, it could be—" Her words were cut off by another unsettling sound from above, this time clearly footsteps, moving rapidly across the floor. "That's it. We're leaving now," Officer Ramirez insisted, taking Rebecca's arm and guiding her firmly toward the front door. "Someone is up there, and given the structural instability, they're in danger, and so are we if more of the ceiling comes down." They exited the house quickly, both blinking in the sudden sunlight. Officer Ramirez immediately called for backup to search the property for trespassers. As they waited by the patrol car, Rebecca stared back at Blackwood Manor, the enormity of what she had done finally hitting her full force. She had spent every penny she had on a building that was literally falling apart around them. A building that housed unknown squatters or vandals. A building that the police officer standing beside her considered too dangerous to enter. "What have I done?" she whispered, the question directed more at herself than anyone else. Officer Ramirez regarded her with surprising compassion. "Ms. Mitchell, I don't know your situation, but I have to be honest with you. This property isn't safe for habitation. Not without major structural work that would cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions." Rebecca nodded numbly, still clutching the silver picture frame she had inadvertently carried out with her. "I have a daughter," she said quietly. "A 14-year-old with autism and sensory processing issues. We're being evicted from our apartment in less than a month. I thought—" She trailed off, the desperation of her plan suddenly sounding insane. When spoken aloud, Officer Ramirez's expression softened. "Look, I can't officially condone anyone staying in a condemned structure, but I do know someone who might be able to help. My brother-in-law, Carlos Mendez, is a contractor who specializes in historical renovations. He might at least be able to tell you if any part of this place could be made safe in the short term." He handed her a business card with a name and number handwritten on the back. "No promises, but Carlos has a soft spot for old buildings and for families in tough spots." As additional patrol cars arrived to search the property, Rebecca sat in her car, staring at the business card and the silver picture frame. She had made a desperate gamble that now seemed doomed to failure. But as she studied the stern face of Thaddeus Blackwood in the photograph, a strange feeling came over her, almost as if the house had been waiting for her, as if there were secrets it wanted someone to discover. That sensation only intensified when she noticed something she had missed before, a small folded paper tucked into the back of the frame. With trembling fingers, she carefully extracted it and unfolded what appeared to be a handwritten note on yellowed paper. "The truth lies above, hidden from all but those who seek with pure intent. TB, Thaddeus Blackwood's initials. A message from the original owner, hidden in a picture frame that had quite literally fallen into her lap." Rebecca looked back at the imposing silhouette of Blackwood Manor, with its turrets and gables outlined against the afternoon sky. What truth lay above? What secrets did the upper floors or perhaps the attic hold? And why did she have the uncanny feeling that the house itself had chosen her to discover them? Rebecca Mitchell faced the hardest conversation of her life that evening when she returned to their tiny apartment. How could she tell her daughter that she had spent their entire savings on a condemned mansion they couldn't even safely enter? "Lily," she began carefully as they sat at their small kitchen table, I have some news about our housing situation. Lily looked up from her homework, her intelligent eyes immediately registering the tension in her mother's voice. Did you find us a new place? She asked, a hint of hope brightening her features. I did, Rebecca admitted, but it's not exactly ready to live in yet. Over the next half hour, Rebecca explained what she had done, showing Lily the property deed and the few photos she had taken of Blackwood Manor's exterior. She tried to present it as an adventure, an opportunity, but she couldn't bring herself to lie about the challenges they faced. To Rebecca's surprise, Lily didn't melt down as she had feared. Instead, her daughter studied the photographs with intense focus, the way she often did when processing new information. It looks like the houses in your art history books, Lily finally said. Second Empire style with Italianate influences circa 1880s? Rebecca smiled despite herself. Lily had absorbed so much from the books and museums that had filled their lives before the divorce. 1887, according to the records, built by a railroad tycoon named Thaddeus Blackwood. Where will we sleep tonight? Lily asked practically, cutting to the immediate concern with her characteristic directness. Rebecca's smile faded. That's the hard part, honey. The house isn't safe to live in yet. It needs extensive repairs before we can move in. So we're homeless, Lily stated flatly, her fingers beginning to tap anxiously against the table, a self-soothing mechanism she often employed when stressed. No, Rebecca reassured her quickly. We still have our apartment for another 3 weeks, and by then, she trailed off, unsure how to complete that sentence honestly. By then what? Lily pressed, her voice rising slightly. Mom, you said you spent all our money on this house. How will we fix it? Where will we go? Rebecca reached across the table to still her daughter's tapping fingers. I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise you I will figure this out. We will have a home. That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, Rebecca sat alone in the dark, scrolling through her minimal contacts list on her phone. She had few friends left after the divorce. Bradford had maintained custody of most of their social circle, and no family nearby who could help. Finally, she dialed the number Officer Ramirez had given her. Carlos Mendez answered on the third ring, his voice gruff but not unkind. When Rebecca explained who she was and that his brother-in-law had referred her, his tone warmed considerably. Blackwood Manor, huh? Miguel told me someone had finally bought that old money pit. Didn't mention it was a single mom with a special needs kid. Rebecca bristled slightly at the characterization, but swallowed her pride. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Mendez. I'm willing to work. I just need to know if there's any way to make even a small part of that house habitable in the next 3 weeks. There was a long pause. Tell you what, Carlos finally said. I'll meet you there tomorrow morning. No promises, but I'll at least take a look. Maybe there's a carriage house or servants' quarters that could be fixed up as a temporary solution. The next morning, Rebecca arranged for Lily to go to school early for her math club meeting and drove to Blackwood Manor, where a battered pickup truck was already waiting. Carlos Mendez was a stocky man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and hands calloused from decades of construction work. He greeted Rebecca with a firm handshake and a skeptical expression. Miguel said you bought this place without having it inspected, he said, getting straight to the point. Mind if I ask why? Rebecca hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. Because I was desperate. My ex-husband got our house in the divorce, my unemployment is running out, and we're being evicted in 3 weeks. This was all I could afford. Carlos's expression softened slightly. Well, let's see what we're dealing with. They spent the next 2 hours carefully exploring the exterior of the property. Carlos pointed out multiple structural issues. The sagging porch, the leaking roof, the cracked foundation on one corner, but also noted areas that were surprisingly intact. Victorian buildings like this were often overbuilt, he explained as they circled to the back of the property. The craftsmanship, is extraordinary, even after years of neglect. In the right hands, this place could be magnificent again. Behind the main house, partially hidden by overgrown hedges, they discovered a smaller structure, what had once been the carriage house, later converted to a garage and caretaker's apartment. "This might be your answer for temporary housing," Carlos said as they carefully entered the building. Unlike the main house, the carriage house had a concrete foundation that had kept moisture at bay. The upper floor, once the caretaker's living quarters, consisted of 2 small rooms and a basic bathroom. "It would need work," Carlos cautioned, testing the floorboards. "New electrical, plumbing updates, roof patching. But structurally, it's sound, much better shape than the main house." For the first time since the auction, Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. How much would it cost to make it livable? And how long would it take? Carlos scratched his chin thoughtfully. "If we focus just on making it safe and functional, not pretty, maybe $15,000 to $20,000. Could be done in 2 to 3 weeks with the right crew." Rebecca's heart sank. "I don't have that kind of money. I spent everything on buying the property." Carlos studied her for a moment. "You said you're willing to work. What skills do you have?" "I was a museum curator," Rebecca replied. "I specialized in artifact authentication and preservation. I can research, catalog, organize." "No construction experience?" Carlos asked. "No, but I'm a quick learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Carlos nodded slowly. "My company is restoring the Wilshire Hotel downtown, another historical property, though not nearly as old as this. One day we're behind schedule because the client keeps changing the design plan. I need someone to catalogue and organize all the salvaged architectural elements, cornices, mantels, light fixtures, things we're preserving for reinstallation." Rebecca's interest was piqued. "That sounds exactly like the kind of work I did at the museum. It doesn't pay much," Carlos warned. "But if you're as good as you say, maybe we can work something out, a combination of pay and trade for work on your carriage house." As they walked back toward their vehicles, an elderly woman approached from the neighboring property, a beautifully restored Victorian painted in historically accurate colors. "I thought I saw people over here," she called, leaning heavily on an ornate walking stick. "Are you the new owner?" Rebecca introduced herself, and the woman smiled, revealing perfect dentures. "Eleanor Winters. I've lived next door for 47 years, watched this poor place decay for the last 9. It's about time someone showed an interest in saving it." Eleanor, it turned out, was a retired history professor who had known Margaret Blackwood, the last owner, personally. "Maggie and I were friends," she explained as she invited them to her porch for lemonade. "Not close, mind you. She kept to herself most of the time, but we shared an interest in local history." "Did she ever mention why certain areas of the house were off limits?" Rebecca asked, remembering the clerk's comment about rooms no one was allowed to enter. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Ah, you've heard about that?" "Yes, Maggie maintained her grandfather's rule that the attic remained sealed. Family tradition," she said. "Something about protecting valuable items until the right person came along to claim them." "The right person?" Rebecca echoed, thinking of the note she had found in the picture frame. "What did that mean?" "Maggie never explained," Eleanor replied, "but the Blackwoods were always an eccentric bunch. Thaddeus, who built the house, was rumored to have unusual beliefs. Mysticism, some said. He believed objects held energy, memories, that certain artifacts would choose their proper guardians." Carlos chuckled skeptically. "Sounds like a convenient excuse to keep people away from whatever he was hiding up there." Eleanor shrugged. "Perhaps, but Maggie took it seriously enough to maintain the tradition until her death. That attic has remained sealed for at least 3 generations." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor caught Rebecca's arm. "There's something else you should know. After Maggie died, before the house was secured by the city, there were break-ins, people looking for rumored treasures. Nothing was ever found, at least nothing reported. but a few of those trespassers left in quite a hurry, according to neighborhood. A gossip? Left in a hurry? Rebecca repeated. Why? They claimed the house was haunted, Eleanor said matter-of-factly. Noises, cold spots, feelings of being watched. One man, a notorious local troublemaker, actually ran down Highland Avenue in the middle of the night, screaming that someone had tried to push him down the stairs. Carlos rolled his eyes. Every old house has ghost stories. True, Eleanor agreed with a smile. But not every house has as many secrets as Blackwood Manor. She turned to Rebecca. If you decide to explore that attic, my dear, I'd be very interested to hear what you find. And in the meantime, you and your daughter are welcome to use my guest room until your place is habitable. Can't have neighbors living in their car, can we? Rebecca was momentarily speechless at the unexpected offer of help. That's incredibly generous, but we couldn't impose. Nonsense, Eleanor interrupted firmly. My children and grandchildren visit for exactly 3 weeks each year, one in summer, one at Christmas, and one at Easter. The rest of the time, that room sits empty while I rattle around this big house by myself. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood gift. That evening, when Rebecca picked up Lily from her after-school program, she had a glimmer of good news to share, a temporary place to stay and potential work that could help them renovate the carriage house. See, she told Lily with more confidence than she truly felt, things are already looking up. Lily studied her mother's face with her perceptive gaze. You're still worried, she observed. Rebecca sighed. Yes, honey, we still have a long way to go. But at least we have a direction now. What she didn't share with Lily was the strange feeling that had come over her as they'd driven away from Blackwood Manor that afternoon. A sensation of being watched from the uppermost windows, from an attic that had remained sealed for generations, waiting for the right person to discover its secrets. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca fell into an exhausting but productive routine. She spent mornings working at the Wilshire Hotel Restoration Project, cataloguing and organizing historical artifacts with a precision that clearly impressed Carlos. Afternoons were dedicated to clearing the overgrown grounds around the carriage house and helping Carlos's crew with the basic renovations, cleaning, painting, and learning the fundamentals of electrical and plumbing work. Evenings were spent with Lily in Eleanor's comfortable guest room, researching the history of Blackwood Manor on her laptop while her daughter did homework. Eleanor proved to be not just a generous host, but a valuable source of local knowledge, providing Rebecca with old newspapers, photographs, and town records that filled in pieces of the Blackwood family history. Thaddeus Blackwood arrived in Colorado in 1875 with very little, Eleanor explained one evening as they reviewed a biographical article from 1890. Within 3 years, he had somehow amassed enough wealth to start his railroad company. By 1887, he was one of the richest men in the state. But the source of his initial capital remained mysterious, Rebecca noted, reading between the lines of the flowery 19th-century prose. This article mentions fortunate investments, but gives no specifics. There were rumors, Eleanor acknowledged. Some said he discovered gold, but kept the location secret. Others suggested he might have robbed a bank back east before coming west with a new identity. The most persistent story, though, was that he found something in a cave while surveying for railroad routes, something of great historical significance that he sold to private collectors. Like what? Lily asked, drawn into the conversation. Despite her usual disinterest in social interactions, historical mysteries were one of her areas of intense focus. Native American artifacts, perhaps, Eleanor suggested, or Spanish colonial treasures. This area had both indigenous settlements and early European exploration. Rebecca thought of the note she had found in the picture frame. The truth lies above, and wondered if the answer to Thaddeus Blackwood's mysterious wealth might indeed be hidden in the sealed attic of the mansion. By the end of the second week, the carriage house transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Carlos and his crew had stabilized the structure, repaired the roof, updated the basic electrical system, and installed second-hand but functional appliances. The walls were freshly painted, the floors sanded and sealed, and the bathroom fixtures replaced. "It's small, but it's safe and weather-tight," Carlos said as he gave Rebecca a final walkthrough. "We'll need to finish the kitchen next week, but you could move in now if you needed to." Rebecca felt overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. This is far more than our agreement covered." Carlos shrugged uncomfortably. "My crew donated some of their time. They like the idea of helping preserve this old place. Besides, your work at the Wilshire project has been excellent. The client specifically mentioned how well organized everything is now." That Saturday, Rebecca decided it was time to properly examine the main house with an eye toward long-term restoration. Eleanor had provided her with the original floor plans, which showed 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms on the second floor, servants' quarters in the rear wing, and an extensive attic level that spanned the entire structure. The mysterious attic was Rebecca's primary interest, but she knew it would be foolish to attempt accessing it without first understanding the structural stability of the floors below. She arranged for Lily to spend the day with Eleanor, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother figure, bonding with the girl over their shared interest in historical research. Carlos had warned Rebecca not to enter the main house alone, but his crew was busy on another job, and her impatience had grown with each passing day. She compromised by asking Miguel Ramirez to accompany her during his off-duty hours. "This is still a bad idea," Officer Ramirez cautioned as they carefully entered through the front door. "But at least Carlos's crew has shored up some of the worst structural issues in this main section." Indeed, temporary supports had been added to several sagging areas, and the more precarious sections had been marked with bright orange warning tape. Carlos had insisted on these basic safety measures before allowing any further exploration, explaining that even if full renovation was years away, they needed to prevent the historic structure from collapsing in the meantime. "I just want to check the condition of the staircase leading to the attic," Rebecca explained. "According to the floor plans, there should be a separate servants' staircase in the back that goes all the way up to the 3rd level. They made their way carefully through the ground floor, documenting damage and noting architectural features worth preserving. Despite years of neglect, the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Hand-carved moldings, inlaid wood floors, and decorative ceiling medallions that would cost a fortune to reproduce today. The main staircase to the 2nd floor had been reinforced, with temporary bracing, making it safe enough to ascend with caution. The upper hallway was lined with doors leading to bedrooms and bathrooms, all in various states of decay. Water damage was extensive in some areas where the roof had leaked, but other rooms were surprisingly well preserved, as if the house had been protecting certain spaces. "The servants' staircase should be through here," Rebecca said, consulting the floor plan as they approached a door at the end of the hallway. The door was locked. "That's odd," Rebecca murmured, trying the handle again. "Why would this be locked when the rest of the house has been accessible to trespassers for years?" Officer Ramirez examined the door with professional interest. "This is a newer lock than the others, probably installed during the last owner's time. And look," he pointed to barely perceptible scratch marks around the keyhole. "Someone's tried to pick it." Rebecca felt a chill. The neighbors mentioned break-ins after Margaret Blackwood died, people looking for rumored treasures. "Seems they didn't get past this door," Officer Ramirez observed. "Do you have keys other than the front door key?" Rebecca had only the single large iron key that had opened the front gate and main entrance. She shook her head. "We could force it, officer," Ramirez suggested. "But given the house's condition, I'd be concerned about structural damage. These old houses often had load-bearing walls in unexpected places." Rebecca was about to reluctantly agree when she remembered the photograph and note she had found on her first visit. She had brought them with her, tucked into her jacket pocket. Something about the stern face of Thaddeus Blackwood had called to her each night as she researched his history. She withdrew the tarnished silver frame and studied it carefully. It was ornate, with decorative elements that seemed merely aesthetic, until she looked closer. One of the silver flourishes on the edge of the frame appeared slightly different from the others, and when she pressed it experimentally, it moved. With trembling fingers, Rebecca pressed harder. There was a soft click, and a small compartment in the frame's thick edge popped open, revealing a tiny, ornate key. "How did you know to do that?" Officer Ramirez asked, clearly impressed. "I didn't, not really," Rebecca admitted, but these hidden compartments were common in Victorian objects. As a curator, I've seen similar mechanisms in jewelry boxes and picture frames from this era. The key was small but intricately crafted, definitely not a modern design. With a sense of anticipation that she couldn't quite explain, Rebecca inserted it into the lock of the servants' staircase door. It fit perfectly. The door opened with a protesting creak, revealing a narrow staircase that disappeared upward into darkness. Unlike the grand main staircase, these steps were plain and utilitarian, designed for servants to move unobtrusively between floors. "Let me go first," Officer Ramirez insisted, switching on his heavy-duty flashlight. These steps could be completely rotted through, but as they cautiously ascended, they discovered that the servants' staircase was in remarkably good condition, as if it had been maintained more recently than the rest of the house. At the top landing, they faced another door, this one heavy and reinforced with iron bands. A large keyhole dominated the center. "This will need a different key," Officer Ramirez observed. "Something much larger than the one you found in the picture frame." Rebecca felt a moment of disappointment, followed by realization. She reached into her bag and withdrew the original large iron key that had opened the front gate and main door. In Victorian houses, it was common for the master key to open all the primary locks, she explained, inserting the key. There was resistance. At first, as if the lock mechanism had rusted or jammed. Then with a loud click that seemed to echo through the empty house, the bolt slid back. The attic door swung open. The air that wafted out was surprisingly dry and free of the musty odor that permeated the rest of the house. Officer Ramirez shone, his flashlight into the space, revealing a vast attic that ran the length and width of the mansion. Unlike the cramped storage spaces of modern homes, this was a fully finished level with high peaked ceilings following the roofline, and it was full of objects, covered furniture, stacked trunks, wooden crates, and what appeared to be display cases draped with yellowed sheets. "It looks like a museum in storage," Rebecca whispered, her curator's eye immediately recognizing the systematic arrangement. This wasn't random storage. This was a carefully preserved collection. They stepped cautiously into the space, Officer Ramirez testing the floorboards before allowing Rebecca to follow. Unlike the floors below, the attic showed no signs of water damage or decay. Somehow, the roof over this section had remained intact, despite the neglect elsewhere. Someone maintained this space, Rebecca realized aloud. Even after they stopped, caring for the rest of the house. But why? Officer Ramirez wondered. What's so important about what's stored up here? Rebecca approached the nearest covered object, a large rectangular shape that resembled a display case. With reverent care, she lifted the yellowed sheet. Beneath was a glass-topped case containing artifacts that made her gasp audibly. Native American ceremonial objects, arranged with museum-quality precision and labeled in faded but elegant handwriting. Ute ceremonial pipe, circa 1750, and Cheyenne medicine pouch, pre-contact period. These are museum-quality artifacts, She breathed, her professional training immediately recognizing their significance. And not just any artifacts. These are rare ceremonial objects. Some of these would be considered sacred by the tribes they came from. They moved from case to case, uncovering more indigenous artifacts, followed by Spanish colonial items, silver crosses, illuminated manuscript pages, and conquistador armor fragments. Each piece was meticulously documented with provenance details. "These have to be worth millions," Officer Ramirez said, stunned by the scope of the collection. "But why hide them in an attic instead of displaying them or donating them to a museum?" Rebecca had developed a theory as she examined the collection. Because Thaddeus Blackwood knew these didn't belong to him. Look at this documentation. He recorded exactly where each item was found, which tribe or settlement it came from. He wasn't just a collector, he was documenting a historical record. One section of the attic differed from the rest, a corner where several large trunks were arranged in a semicircle. Unlike the display cases, these appeared more personal in nature. Rebecca approached the largest trunk, which bore the initials TB in brass lettering. The trunk was locked, but a small keyhole, similar to the one in the servant's door, caught her attention. With a sense of destiny, she inserted the small key from the picture frame. Inside the trunk lay the answer to the mystery of Thaddeus Blackwood's sudden wealth. Leather-bound journals documented his discovery of a cave system during railroad surveying, a cave that contained both indigenous artifacts and items left by early Spanish explorers. Correspondence with private collectors showed that Blackwood had selectively sold certain items to fund his railroad business while keeping the most significant pieces in his personal collection. But most revealing was a letter dated 1897, apparently written but never sent. "I have come to understand the grave error of my appropriation of these sacred and historical artifacts. While the law recognizes my right to these discoveries on land I purchased, my conscience can no longer accommodate their possession. However, I fear that neither our government institutions nor our museums can be trusted to honor the true significance of these items or return them to their rightful cultural homes when the time is right. Therefore, I have created this private collection as a trust, to be maintained until such time as our society evolves enough to properly respect and honor the cultures from which these treasures came." Rebecca sat back on her heels, stunned by the insight this provided into a man history had portrayed as merely a ruthless industrial baron. He knew what he had done was wrong, at least eventually. This collection wasn't about possession, it was about preservation. But why seal it away? Officer Ramirez asked. Why not just donate everything to a museum even then? Because in his time, museums were still treating indigenous artifacts as curiosities, not sacred cultural items, Rebecca explained, her curatorial knowledge filling in the historical context. It wasn't until the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in 1990 that museums were legally required to work with tribes on returning sacred objects. As they continued exploring the attic, they discovered something even more extraordinary, a hidden room behind a sliding panel containing a collection of documents unlike anything Rebecca had seen before. "These are original treaties," she gasped, carefully examining papers protected in glass cases, between the U.S. government and various indigenous nations. And look, these are copies of land deeds showing the original tribal territories before settlement. Officer Ramirez leaned in to see better. Why would a railroad tycoon have these? Because railroads were one of the primary forces that displaced indigenous peoples, Rebecca explained. Blackwood was documenting the original land claims, perhaps as evidence, perhaps out of guilt. The most startling discovery came in a small leather portfolio labeled simply reparations. Inside were legal documents establishing a trust fund, seeded with a significant portion of Blackwood's fortune, designated for the benefit of those peoples and cultures from whose lands and heritage I have profited. According to the documents, the trust had been established in 1899 with the equivalent of several million in today's dollars, to remain untouched until specific conditions were met. Conditions that included the identification and documentation of all artifacts in the collection and their proper attribution to their cultures of origin. Rebecca's hands trembled as she realized the implications. If this trust still exists, with over a century of compound interest, it would be worth a fortune. Officer Ramirez finished the thought. But who controls it now? The final document in the portfolio answered that question. The trustee shall be the rightful owner of Blackwood Manor, upon the condition that they discover this chamber of their own accord and declare their intent to fulfill the catalogue and repatriation requirements herein described. Rebecca sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. That's why the attic remained sealed. That's why Margaret Blackwood maintained the family tradition of keeping this area off limits. They were waiting for the right person, someone who would understand the significance of this collection and fulfill Thaddeus Blackwood's final wish to return these items to their rightful cultural homes. And that person is you, Officer Ramirez said quietly, a museum curator who specializes in artifact authentication and preservation, who just happened to buy this house when no one else would. Not happened, Rebecca murmured, remembering Eleanor's words about the Blackwood family's belief that objects chose their guardians. Maybe the house really did choose me. The following Monday, Rebecca contacted a lawyer specializing in trust law, sharing her discovery while carefully omitting specific details about the artifacts until proper security could be arranged. The attorney, Diane Williams, was initially skeptical but agreed to research the Blackwood Trust at the State Archives. If this trust exists and has remained active all these years, Williams explained during their consultation, it would have required minimal management to avoid being escated to the state as abandoned property. Someone must have been maintaining it even if the specific purpose remained confidential. Rebecca also reached out to her former museum colleagues, specifically Dr. Anton Vega, her mentor and the museum's head of indigenous collections. His expertise would be invaluable in properly documenting the artifacts and eventually connecting with the appropriate tribal representatives. This could be the most significant private collection of indigenous artifacts discovered in decades, Dr. Vega told her over the phone, his voice vibrating with excitement. If what you're describing is accurate, Rebecca, some of these items may be sacred objects that tribes have been seeking for generations. Meanwhile, Carlos and his crew had secured the main house more effectively, reinforcing the attic floor and installing a proper locking system on both the servants' staircase and the attic door. Rebecca had explained her discovery in general terms, a valuable historical collection, without revealing the full extent of what she had found. Whatever's up there has been safe for 100 years, Carlos observed pragmatically. Let's make sure it stays that way while you figure out the legal aspects. By Wednesday, Rebecca and Lily had moved into the renovated carriage house, which, though small, felt like a miracle after their cramped apartment and the looming threat of homelessness. Lily had immediately claimed the smaller of the two rooms, arranging her books and sensory tools with the precise organization that helped her manage her environment. It's quieter here, Lily observed during their first dinner in their new home. I can hear myself think. Rebecca smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. I'm glad, honey, and soon we'll start working on the main house too. Can I see the attic collection? Lily asked. Dr. Vega said I could help catalog if you approved. Dr. Vega had always recognized Lily's exceptional memory and attention to detail, occasionally allowing her to assist with museum catalog work on school holidays. For Lily, the systematic nature of cataloguing was both soothing and engaging. "Once we have proper security in place," Rebecca promised, "these artifacts aren't just valuable in terms of money, they're irreplaceable cultural treasures." That Friday, Diane Williams called with news. "The Blackwood Trust exists," she confirmed. "It was established in 1899 and has been maintained by the same Denver law firm for generations. The current assets—" She paused dramatically. "Rebecca, the trust is currently valued at approximately $38 million. Rebecca nearly dropped the phone. $38 million, she repeated, her voice a shocked whisper. Conservative management, compound interest, and some strategic investments by the trustees over the decades, Williams explained. However, accessing these funds comes with specific conditions, as you discovered in the documents. The money can only be used for the purposes Thaddeus Blackwood outlined: proper documentation of the collection and repatriation of items to their cultures of origin, with remaining funds dedicated to educational initiatives and cultural preservation. "That's exactly what I want to do with the collection," Rebecca assured her. "It aligns perfectly with modern museum ethics and my own professional values. Then we should proceed with filing the appropriate paperwork to have you recognized as the rightful trustee," Williams said. "I must caution you, though, this will not remain private for long. A trust of this size, with such unusual conditions and history, will attract attention." Williams' warning proved prophetic. The following morning, a sleek black SUV pulled up to Blackwood Manor as Rebecca was leaving for a meeting with Dr. Vega. A tall, elegantly dressed woman emerged. Late 50s, with expertly colored blonde hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca Mitchell," the woman inquired, extending a manicured hand. "Victoria Harrington Development Group. I understand you've recently acquired this property." Rebecca shook her hand cautiously. "Yes, that's right." "Wonderful. Our company specializes in historical renovations and luxury condominium conversions. We've had our eye on Blackwood Manor for years, but the city's restrictions made it challenging to acquire. Now that it's in private hands, we'd like to make you an offer." She named a figure that made Rebecca blink: $750,000, 10 times what she had paid. "I'm not interested in selling," Rebecca replied, recovering from her surprise. "I'm planning to restore the house myself." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a lovely sentiment, Miss Mitchell, but you're looking at several $1 million in restoration costs. Our research indicates you purchased this property with the last of your financial resources following a divorce. Our offer would give you a substantial profit without the headache of managing a historic renovation." The fact that this stranger knew so much about her personal circumstances was unsettling. "How did you learn about my financial situation?" Rebecca asked directly. "We research all our potential acquisitions thoroughly," Victoria replied smoothly. "Property records are public after all, and small towns have a way of sharing information. Well, thank you for your interest, but as I said, the property is not for sale." Rebecca moved toward her car, hoping to end the conversation. "Perhaps I should be more transparent," Victoria said, her tone shifting slightly. "Our company is particularly interested in the rumored artifacts collection in the attic. We have private collectors who would pay handsomely for such items, no questions asked." Rebecca froze, then turned slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, instantly on guard. "The house was empty when I bought it." Victoria's smile turned knowing. "Miss Mitchell, please. You were a museum curator. Officer Ramirez has been seen entering the house with you. Your former colleague, Dr. Vega, has suddenly cancelled his sabbatical plans. It doesn't take a genius to connect these dots. Even if such a collection existed," Rebecca said carefully, "selling artifacts of cultural significance to private collectors would be ethically problematic, potentially even illegal, depending on their provenance. Ethics can be flexible when millions of dollars are involved. Victoria responded with a dismissive wave. Our final offer is $1.5 million for the property and all its contents. That's life-changing money for someone in your position. Enough to secure your daughter's future and restart your career anywhere you choose. The offer was tempting. Rebecca couldn't deny that. With that money, she could buy a comfortable home, outright establish a college fund for Lily, and never worry about financial security again. But the thought of these sacred artifacts disappearing into private collections, hidden away from the cultures that created them and the public who could learn from them, was antithetical to everything she believed in as a curator. My answer is still no, Rebecca said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment. Victoria's pleasant facade dropped completely. You should reconsider, Ms. Mitchell. Our company has significant resources and influence. The permitting process for historical renovations can become complicated for those who don't have the right connections. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Are you threatening me? Rebecca asked, standing her ground despite her racing heart. Simply stating facts, Victoria replied, her voice cool. Historic preservation boards, building inspectors, zoning committees, all can make restoration projects either run smoothly or become nightmarish. Your decision affects not just you, but your special needs daughter as well. Think about what's best for her. The mention of Lily sent a protective surge through Rebecca. My daughter is precisely why I won't sell these artifacts to private collectors. She deserves to grow up seeing me stand by my principles even when it's difficult. As Victoria returned to her SUV, she turned with a final remark. We'll be in touch, Miss Mitchell. Everyone has a breaking point. We just need to find yours. The encounter left Rebecca shaken. She called Diane Williams from her car, explaining what had happened. This isn't surprising, the attorney said. Word travels fast when there's money involved. The Harrington Development Group has a reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics, particularly with historical properties. And they have connections to several private collectors known for acquiring indigenous artifacts through less than transparent channels. How would they even know about the collection? We've been so careful. Small towns have few secrets, Williams reminded her. If Officer Ramirez mentioned it to anyone, if Carlos's crew noticed anything unusual, the Blackwood collection has been the subject of a local legend for generations. Once you started showing interest in the attic, it wouldn't take much for people to connect the dots. Later that afternoon, Rebecca met with Dr. Vega at a cafe in a neighboring town, deliberately chosen for privacy. The distinguished curator, with his salt-and-pepper beard and wire-rimmed glasses, listened intently as she described both the collection and the confrontation with Victoria Harrington. The Harrington Group is well known in museum circles, he confirmed grimly. They've been implicated in several questionable private sales of indigenous artifacts, though they're careful to maintain plausible deniability through intermediaries. What should I do? Rebecca asked. I can't let these artifacts disappear into private collections. They belong with their original cultures or in public museums where everyone can learn from them. You need to move quickly, Dr. Vega advised. Once word spreads about a collection of this magnitude, you'll face more than just the Harrington Group. Authenticate and document everything as rapidly as possible, establish your legal control of the trust, and make formal contact with tribal representatives. I'll need help, Rebecca admitted. I can't do this alone, especially with Harrington already making threats. Dr. Vega smiled. You're not alone. I can bring in trusted colleagues from the museum's conservation department to assist with documentation. And I have connections with tribal historic preservation officers who can help identify which nations should be consulted for potential repatriation. As they planned the documentation process, Rebecca's phone rang. Eleanor Winters calling with an urgent message. "Rebecca, dear, there's a building inspector at your house right now. He says there's been a complaint about code violations and unauthorized occupancy of a condemned structure." Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances with Dr. Vega. "I'll be right." "There," she told Eleanor. "Please ask him to wait." "The Harrington group works quickly," Dr. Vega observed as they rushed to their cars. "This is a classic intimidation tactic." When they arrived at Blackwood Manor, they found a city vehicle parked out front and a man in a reflective vest examining the exterior of the carriage house where Rebecca and Lily were living. Eleanor stood nearby, engaged in what appeared to be a holding action of conversation. "Miss Mitchell?" the inspector called as Rebecca approached. "Frank Dawson, City Building Department. We've received a complaint about illegal occupancy of a condemned structure." "The main house is condemned." "Yes," Rebecca acknowledged, "and we're not living in it. The carriage house has been renovated with proper permissions." She gestured toward the smaller building. "Carlos Mendez handled the work and filed all the necessary paperwork." The inspector consulted his tablet. "I don't see any permits on file. Would for this address." "That's odd," Rebecca replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "Carlos said everything was properly submitted. Would you like to call him to confirm?" The mention of Carlos Mendez's name caused a flicker of hesitation in the inspector's demeanor. Carlos was well respected in the local building community and known for doing everything by the book. "That won't be necessary," Dawson said after. "A moment. I'll check with the office to see if the paperwork was misplaced. In the meantime, I need to verify that the carriage house meets minimum safety standards." The inspection that followed was thorough, but fair. Dawson seemed genuinely surprised by the quality of the renovation, commenting several times on the craftsmanship. By the end, his initial combative approach had softened considerably. "Everything seems to be in order here," he admitted, making final notes on his tablet. "I'll need to see those permits, but the work itself exceeds code requirements in most areas." As he was preparing to leave, Rebecca decided to take a calculated risk. "Mr. Dawson, can I ask who filed the complaint? Was it the Harrington Development Group by any chance?" The inspector's expression confirmed her suspicion before he could compose his features. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that information." "I understand," Rebecca replied. "I just find it interesting that they would file a complaint hours after I refused to sell them the property." Dawson paused, then lowered his voice. "Ms. Mitchell, some friendly advice. The Harrington Group has considerable influence with certain members of the City Council and Building Department. If they've set their sights on your property, this inspection won't be the last obstacle you face." "Are you warning me?" Rebecca asked, surprised by his candor. "Let's just say I believe in fair play," Dawson replied. "My job is to enforce building codes, not help wealthy developers pressure homeowners into selling. But not everyone in my department shares that perspective." After Dawson left, Dr. Vega looked troubled. "This is just the beginning. The Harrington Group will escalate their tactics if their initial pressure doesn't work. Then we need to work faster," Rebecca said with determination. "How quickly can your team begin documenting the collection?" "I can have people here tomorrow," Dr. Vega promised. "The sooner we establish the collection's cultural and historical significance through proper documentation, the stronger your position will be." That evening, as Rebecca explained the situation to Lily in simplified terms, her daughter surprised her with an unexpected insight. "They're like the artifact traffickers in your museum ethics books," Lily observed. "The ones who steal cultural items and sell them to rich collectors." "That's actually a very apt comparison," Rebecca acknowledged, impressed by her daughter's ability to connect disparate information. "Those artifacts don't belong to them," Lily continued, her voice taking on the passionate tone she used when discussing subjects that deeply engaged her moral sense. They belong to the indigenous peoples who made them. That's why museums have repatriation programs, right? To give back what was wrongfully taken. Rebecca felt a surge of pride in her daughter's ethical clarity. Exactly right. And that's why we're going to stand our ground, even when it's difficult. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Rebecca sat in the small living room of the carriage. A house, the Blackwood documents spread before her. Something had been nagging at her about Victoria Harrington's specific interest in the artifacts. The development company's eagerness seemed disproportionate, even for a valuable collection. Why would a real estate development firm be so focused on acquiring artifacts rather than just the property itself? Returning to Thaddeus Blackwood's journals, Rebecca found a passage she had previously skimmed over. Among the artifacts recovered from the cave system, those of greatest concern are the 7 ceremonial items I have catalogued separately in the red leather portfolio. These objects, according to both indigenous oral traditions and Spanish records, are believed to be connected to a significant untapped mineral deposit in the Western Mountains. I have deliberately obscured the specific location in my records, as the extraction would destroy sites sacred to the Ute people. The red leather portfolio. Rebecca had seen it in the attic, but hadn't yet examined its contents, focusing instead on establishing the overall scope of the collection. Could this be what the Harrington Group was truly after? Not just valuable artifacts, but information leading to a mineral deposit. She made a mental note to search for the portfolio during the documentation process, scheduled to begin tomorrow. If her suspicion was correct, the Harrington Group's interest went far beyond historic real estate or even valuable artifacts. They might be pursuing information about natural resources worth exponentially more. The documentation team arrived early. Dr. Vega and 3 trusted colleagues, all experts in indigenous artifacts. They meticulously photographed and catalogued the attic collection, confirming its extraordinary historical significance. Rebecca discovered a red leather portfolio containing information about 7 ceremonial objects. The detailed notes revealed something shocking. These artifacts contained encoded information about an undiscovered silver deposit in the mountains, worth potentially hundreds of millions. This explained Victoria Harrington's desperate interest, beyond just real estate development. That afternoon, Rebecca noticed a dark sedan repeatedly driving past the property. Officer Ramirez confirmed it was likely Harrington's surveillance team. Following his advice, Rebecca arranged for security systems to be installed at both the carriage house and mansion, with particular focus on the attic. That night, the security lights caught someone prowling near the property. The next morning brought a terrifying escalation. Lily's school called. A man claiming to be from Child Protective Services had attempted to question Lily about their living situation. When pressed for credentials, he fled. The school confirmed with actual CPS that no investigation was open. Someone impersonated a government official to intimidate you through your child, the counselor said gravely. This has gone beyond normal business tactics. Ramirez took a formal report and began investigating the impersonation incident, which constituted a criminal offense. Meanwhile, Diane Williams called with alarming news. Victoria Harrington has filed a competing claim to the Blackwood Trust, asserting she's a distant relative of Thaddeus Blackwood. It's almost certainly fabricated, but will tie us up in legal proceedings. The situation worsened when the school called again. A woman falsely claiming to be Rebecca's sister had attempted to remove Lily from school, citing a family emergency. When questioned, she fled to a vehicle bearing Harrington Development Group insignia. This attempt to interfere with custody generated immediate community backlash. Local news outlets picked up the story, and protesters gathered outside Harrington's office. For Lily's safety, Rebecca arranged for her to stay with grandparents at a hotel in a neighboring city. The stakes had escalated far beyond a property. Dispute. Harrington was now willing to target a child in her relentless pursuit of the artifacts that would lead to the silver deposit. As Rebecca researched Blackwood's journals more carefully, she discovered the 7 ceremonial objects contained encoded information about a significant silver deposit, one that indigenous peoples had deliberately kept secret because the location was considered sacred. That evening, the power suddenly went out at Eleanor's house where Rebecca was staying. Simultaneously, her phone lost signal. Looking toward Blackwood Manor, Rebecca spotted dark figures moving stealthily toward the main house, Harrington's team making their move. They're going for the attic collection, Rebecca realized. Specifically, the ceremonial objects that reveal the location of the silver deposit. Eleanor, surprising Rebecca, retrieved an old service revolver from a hidden compartment. When you live alone as a woman for as long as I have, you learn to be prepared. She activated an emergency radio with a distress beacon while Rebecca made a daring decision. I need to get to the attic before they do. Rebecca slipped across to Blackwood Manor and used her knowledge of the house to reach the attic through a hidden passage, arriving just as the intruders broke through the servants' staircase door. Find the ceremonial artifacts, Victoria Harrington herself commanded. The important ones will have tribal markings and astronomical symbols. While the intruders searched, Rebecca carefully removed the 7 artifacts and concealed them in a secret floor compartment Blackwood had designed, one documented in his journal but not obvious to casual observers. Just as she finished, a flashlight beam caught her. Victoria confronted her directly, threatening to stage an accident in a condemned building. Before she could act, police sirens approached rapidly. Eleanor's emergency beacon had worked. Harrington and her team fled, but not before issuing a final threat. This isn't over. Officer Ramirez led police into the attic, relieved to find Rebecca unharmed. What were you thinking coming in here alone? I couldn't let them take those artifacts, Rebecca explained, revealing the hidden compartment where she'd secured the precious items. The tribal representatives are coming tomorrow specifically to see them. Ramirez shook his head, impressed despite himself. You should have waited for police, but your quick thinking probably saved those artifacts. The next morning's local newspaper headline read, Historic Artifact Heist Foiled at Blackwood Manor. The story detailed how Rebecca had protected priceless indigenous artifacts from theft by Victoria Harrington, who now faced multiple criminal charges. You were extraordinarily brave, Eleanor told Rebecca over coffee. Perhaps a bit foolish, but the best kind of foolishness, the kind that comes from protecting what matters. Support poured in from the community. Carlos brought coffee for police officers processing the crime scene. Dr. Vega reported the university had rejected Harrington's legal threats. Most importantly, Diane Williams called with breakthrough news. The judge has granted our emergency. Motion, you've been recognized as presumptive trustee with immediate access to funds for securing the collection. Rebecca's parents arrived with Lily, who rushed into her mother's arms. Mom, you stopped bad guys. I just protected some important historical artifacts, Rebecca said modestly. Officer Ramirez said you were brave, Lily insisted. He said you outsmarted people who wanted to steal history. The day's most significant moment came with the arrival of tribal representatives from 3 indigenous nations. They examined artifacts many had known only through oral traditions, sacred objects thought lost generations ago. Our histories said these were taken by a bearded man who came to survey the railroad, an elderly Ute woman explained, touching a ceremonial pipe. They were thought lost forever. Now they can return home. When shown the 7 ceremonial objects, Daniel Runningbear, a tribal preservation officer, explained, these mark the sacred mountain, a place of silver that our ancestors kept secret because of its spiritual significance. Even if Harrington had obtained these artifacts, she would not have found what she sought without the traditional knowledge to interpret them correctly. The representatives worked with Dr. Vega's team to develop a plan for appropriate repatriation, with provisions for educational exhibition before final return. As they prepared to leave, the Ute elder presented Rebecca with a small handcrafted medallion. "A token of gratitude from our people," she said. The note accompanying it read, "The guardian of histories, one who bridges past and future with respect." This simple gift, carrying cultural significance rather than monetary value, moved Rebecca more deeply than any financial reward could have. 6 months later, Blackwood Manor stood transformed. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, the roof replaced, and the exterior restored to Victorian elegance. Inside, the main public spaces had been carefully brought back to life, with period-appropriate fixtures and finishes. The attic had become a proper conservation space for documenting and preparing artifacts for repatriation. In the backyard, a native plant garden now flourished, designed with indigenous botanists to showcase traditional medicinal plants. Most significantly, the grand parlour had been converted into an exhibition space, telling the story of Blackwood's complex legacy. Rebecca greeted attendees at the official opening reception for what had become known as the Blackwood Reconciliation Project. "The goal isn't to villainize or glorify Blackwood," she explained to a reporter. "It's to present an honest accounting of how wealth was accumulated during that era, often at great cultural cost to indigenous peoples, and to demonstrate that reconciliation and repair are possible." Lily, now thriving as a junior docent for educational programs, moved confidently among visitors, her encyclopedic knowledge impressing academic experts. The trust provided specialized educational support for her autism and established a college fund. The legal resolution had been straightforward once Victoria Harrington's criminal actions came to light. As legal owner who had discovered the collection and demonstrated commitment to repatriation, Rebecca was confirmed as rightful trustee. Victoria Harrington faced mounting legal troubles. Investigations uncovered similar tactics in previous development projects: environmental violations, bribery, and intimidation. Most satisfying to Rebecca was the announcement that the mountain area containing the silver deposit had been designated as protected cultural heritage sites. As the reception continued, Rebecca found herself drawn to Thaddeus Blackwood's portrait in the entry hall. "I wonder what you would think of all this," she murmured. "Talking to paintings now," came Carlos Mendez's teasing voice. Their relationship had developed naturally through shared challenges of the past months. "Just contemplating." "Historical ironies," she replied. "A desperate gamble on a condemned house led to all of this." The house that had once represented rock bottom had become the foundation for a new beginning, not just for her family, but for cultural artifacts returning to their rightful homes and communities, healing through reconciliation. When Rebecca Mitchell spent her last $75,000 on a condemned Victorian mansion, most people thought she had made a terrible mistake. But what she discovered didn't just change her life, it began healing wounds that had existed for generations. The Blackwood Reconciliation Project now stands as a model for cultural repatriation. Over 50 sacred artifacts have been returned to their tribal nations, with ceremonies bringing healing to communities still recovering from historical losses. Victoria Harrington was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. The mountain site she sought to mine has been permanently protected as a sacred cultural area. Sometimes, the most desperate gambles lead to the most extraordinary discoveries, and sometimes what looks like the end of everything becomes the beginning of something far more meaningful than you could have ever imagined.